Let me talk a little bit about my knife collection. I started looking to buy the best knife, and I bought, when I say a collection, I don't like to buy a knife set with a block that all comes together. I found I'd rather pick and choose my knives and, uh, the selection, a chef knife, a smaller knife, a paring knife, maybe a bread knife, a slicer, and make up my own set. I was looking for the best knife, and I found real quick that there is no best knife, that it's all so personal and so subjective, that what you love to use and what I love to use may be totally different, but there are a ton of production knives out there that are very good. Most of us, if you're like me, you went into the kitchen, you opened up the drawer, you looked in there, you picked out a knife that looked like it fit your need for what you were going to do, and you just used it. And if it was dull, you maybe tried to sharpen it, or you didn't use it anymore and went to another one because you knew it was sharper. And we just learned to use what we had. Well, it wasn't until we got a little older and we got a little independent and successful that we were able to choose a knife, to buy a purpose purchased knife, to be that knife that you always want to use. And what most of us did was we chose a knife we were familiar with because that's what we used growing up. Well, when I started looking to purchase knives, I wanted to purchase a good knife, and I went on the forums, and I went to, kitchen knife forum and knife forum and sharpening forums and whatever, looking for the best knife. And what I found were recommendations for a middle of the road price knife that was a good example, a good entry level knife for sharpeners. First introduction to Japanese chef knives. And the one name that came up all the time was Tohiro, Tohiro DP. And that was a good choice knife. They were moderate, middle of the road, decent steel, made well, and it was a good example of a Japanese chef knife. The steel was good, inexpensive, easy to sharpen. But what I did is I sharpened these brand new knives. I used them, took them out of the box, cut with them. They were fantastic. I loved them, and I wanted to sharpen them, and I sharpened them again and again and again because I was trying to practice sharpening knives. I was trying to sharpen sharp knives to make them sharper. And every time you sharpen a knife, you remove a little bit of steel. And I removed more steel, more steel. And what I was doing was I was taking a little bit off, and I'm moving that edge from where it's very thin down to where it gets thicker. And I ended up with some very sharp, stubby knives. And what I learned and what I took away from that couple years worth of collecting and buying and sharpening was that I was sharpening knives, chasing a feel, chasing a sharpened edge feel that I liked, that I wanted, but I didn't know whether it was any good because I had no basis for comparison. I was taking sharp knives, never using them, just, maybe slice a piece of paper to see if it would cut, or, shave the hair on my arm, but then went right to cutting tomatoes and veggies and whatever. But I never used knives, not never, but I often did not use a knife long enough to have any idea what that knife was supposed to feel like. I didn't take a knife out of the box and use it and cut with it to feel how the knife was made by the knife maker. I took knives, looked at them, tested them for sharpness and whatever, and clamped them up and sharpened them. So what I did was I had a bunch of knives that had my edge on them. What I did was I bought a knife maker's knife to bring it home like it was a blank knife that I made in a kit that I sharpened myself from the blank. Even though I bought a sharp knife from a known, respected knife maker, I was bringing it home and pretending it was a knife kit and putting my edge on it, what I thought, and my lack of experience sharpening, I was putting on my best edge. And I was sharpening knives and making real sharp knives, but I wasn't learning what I felt I needed to learn because I ignored the lesson that was handed to me when I took that knife out of the box. The lesson is, what does this knife feel like that this maker made? And at that point, I came to the conclusion that I want to use knives as they're made by the knife maker long enough to know what that knife, as it was made and sharpened by the knife maker, I want to use it long enough that I know what it feels like. Then, only then, when it needs to be sharpened, when it is not cutting how I've become accustomed to using that knife maker's knife, when it feels like now it needs to be sharpened, when I go to sharpen it, then I have some basis of comparison to understand how my sharpened edge I apply to it using Wicked Edge, how that compares to that new knife I took out of the box. See, what I did was I sharpened all these new knives and I made very sharp knives, but I knew nothing about the quality of that knife that I sharpened. So I stepped back and I made this pact with myself that I will not sharpen a knife before it needs to be sharpened. Now that doesn't hold 100%. I will buy a very inexpensive knife, $20, $25 knife, and sharpen it to show. Sharpen it as a show and tell. Sharpen it to see if I can make it prettier than it was out of the box. I do take knives and I test them for sharpness first. I do take every knife and I clamp them up and inspect the edge and photograph it and record that. I do have a spreadsheet where I input knives and I put their steel and their handle type and where I bought them and the price and the angle that I measured to start with and my initial inspection. Then I use the knife and I use it as it was made by the maker, and I use it long enough to get accustomed to it, and I use it long enough that I put enough edge wear on it so that now when I sharpen it, I have a comparison of how it felt out of the box. I used it enough to have an idea, and now I've dulled it enough to recognize that the knife isn't performing as well as when I got it, and now when I apply an edge, I have some basis for comparison. But what I was doing in the past was I was taking knives out of the box like they were blank knives, and I was applying my edge, reprofiling most of them. Whatever they were sent to me, I didn't really measure that or look at that. All I did was match up so that I knew that the knife was clamped in the sweet spot, and then I put whatever angle I wanted on it. So I spent a lot of money, wasted a lot of money buying proprietary knives that were excellent knives and treating them like they were a blank, and I was doing them like it was a kit knife that I was making myself. So I lost a couple years. I learned a lot about sharpening Wicked Edge because as I was sharpening these sharp knives, I was inspecting with a USB microscope the scratch patterns that I applied, and I was comparing the sharpness with an edge on up, and I was photographing. I did a lot of stuff, but the order wasn't quite right. So when I made that pact that that I would use a knife first in order to understand what I was working with, it made a big difference. Now, I continued to collect knives as I saw knives that looked to me in the future they would be challenging and interesting and educating, enlightening to me to learn how to sharpen that profile, that knife shape, that knife style, that knife size, whatever it is. The challenge is sharpen that and be able to clamp it and access that edge and figure it all out using a wicked edge is what I'm about. But now I'm trying to apply an edge that emulates the maker's edge, emulates that edge that I identified and photographed with my initial inspection when I first take the knife out of the box and I clamp it up and I look at it under magnification and I look at the heel and I look at the tip and I try to compare the grind on the left side to the grind on the right side, because some knives are uneven ground, some knives are not really sharpened. You'd be surprised how imperfect sharpened edges are on knives that come from the factory, how imperfect they appear, but how beautifully they cut. And what that told me is that the perfection that I'm looking for is not necessarily what makes a knife sharp. And that is a lesson that I'm chasing my whole sharpening career, my whole sharpening experience, is how to apply that edge, that sharp edge, because it's not something that's perfect appearing, perfect symmetrical appearing. There's something more physical at work than just looking right. Now, as I started sharpening, then I bought more and different knives that would challenge my ability to sharpen them. And then I started trying to dissect the sharpening norms, the lessons that we've all passed on down the sharpening chain, how to deal with these different sharpening situations. And that's where we're at. I'm going to stop this video because I want to talk about knives. This is the rabbit hole. This is where I got with Wicked Edge, is that I learned how to sharpen knives very well, but I wasn't understanding what I was sharpening. There are so many different varieties of knife shapes and bevels and grinds and angles that it's not just a rule. There's not just a basis that you always do it that way. There's a lot to it. There's a lot of innuendo, a lot of finesse, a lot of different things that we're going to talk about in more of these Knife Talk on Sunday School. Thank you.